Brother David, the first question I have for you is perhaps the most creative question, and so let's begin there. What do you think is missing for most people with regard to death and dying, their attitudes toward death and dying? What's missing, the presence of which would transform their approach to death and dying?
Well, I just tell you what comes to my mind offhand.
Sure.
And that is, what's really missing is to be fully alive. Because if we were fully alive right now, we wouldn't have to worry about being fully alive when it comes to dying. And at that time, we would know how to deal with it. You have to be very alive to deal with dying. It's something very active. Even the word to die has in the English language and in many other languages no passive voice. You can't say I am being died. If you're being died, you come out green or blue, but not dead. You can be killed, and you will be killed sooner or later by something, but you have to die. That's something that you have to actively do. And so if you really know how to live actively, you will also be able to die actively when life asks that from you.
Sure. Well, then let's follow that up with the obvious question about how one goes about living fully so that one then can die in the proper way, fully.
Right. Well, that turns the thing around now, and that means, you can put it this way, you can only live fully, and that means come alive fully, if you're willing to die. Because, and I mean that very, very concretely right now. Abraham Maslow, the great psychiatrist, said he had found in his practice that most people were afraid of death and of dying. But there was one thing that even more people were afraid of, and that is living. And we are afraid of living because if you're really alive, it means letting go and meeting the unknown and meeting surprise. And that is a little death. In other words, unless you die to this present moment, you won't be alive to the next moment.
Yes.
And so you have to let go and let go. And that is one of the main things, maybe the main thing, that we have to learn in order to come fully alive.
I see. So really what I'm hearing you saying now is that in order to be able to die, we have to be able to live fully. In order to be able to live fully, we have to be willing and able to die even before we die.
Right.
That is, now let's focus on that for a moment. Dying before dying. Now, here you are seated in a monk's garb, and I take it that, in some sense, as a monk, you actively practice dying. Could you speak a little bit about that, not necessarily even in just your own tradition, but this whole practice, the monastic practice of welcoming death into life each day?
Well, that's interesting that you should ask that question. First of all, in all the different monastic traditions, death plays a very important role, this awareness of death and that willingness to die and all that. But in my personal vocation, when I was a student, a fellow student lent me the Rule of St. Benedict, which is the little book written some 1200 years ago that the Benedictines live by, arrange their monasteries by. And when I read it for the first time, there was one sentence that most struck me of all the things in there, and that was the little sentence, to have death at all times before your eyes. And when I read that, I thought, oh gee, when it comes to dying, if that is in 80 years or 100 years, at that time that was still a possibility, I would like to have had death at all times before my eyes, because that would seem to me then I would have lived the way I would like to have lived. So that really struck me very much. And actually, in the acceptance of a novice into the monastery, for instance, when you become a monk, this is not done in that dramatic way, in this romantic way anymore, but it used to be done that even some funeral rites were performed. For instance, that you were covered with the pall with which the casket is covered, but still you stretch out as if you were dead on the ground, and then you are raised up to the life in a monk. You die and are raised to a new life. And the same with the saffron robes. Most people don't know why the Buddhist monks wear saffron robes and the Hindu monks wear saffron robes. Well, that is the cloth after it has gone through cremation. It is scorched. That is the idea, you see. So they are wearing as if they had gone through death. And it's the same thing in the Hindu tradition, for instance. The monks, when they become monks, they will... everything will be taken away from them, so to say, by the guru. Now give us this, and give us this, and give us this. And now give us your body, even your body, they will say. But you will need a body to serve others, so we give you back your body. But you have sort of lost it already in that ceremony. So, and then, as you live this monastic life, because you have gone ritually through this death and rising, you are invited to live every moment as a dying to that present moment. That means not clinging to anything. Let it go and come alive to the next one, more fully alive, therefore.
So I would think that a person who was able to do that wouldn't have the same problem with death that a person would have who couldn't do that. Because then, when the actual moment of death shows up, it's just another one of those dyings, another one of those... Yes. I'd like to ask you a question about reincarnation. Now, as a Catholic monk, you, of course, you take a stand for resurrection. Not only the resurrection of Christ, but the promised resurrection of all those who follow Christ. So you take a stand for resurrection. At the same time, let's say, roughly speaking, half the world doesn't believe in resurrection, but believes in reincarnation. And so I'm wondering what reflection you have upon that, what sense that makes to you, how that kind of fits into your planetary spirituality. Yes. What's your feeling about reincarnation?
Well, you have packed so many questions into this one question that I think we could spend an hour just unpacking those. And I'll just mention some that I heard in there. Okay. One is the question of resurrection. I will not address myself to that right now, because that...
That's fine. I have another question about resurrection.
Okay. Then, of course, the main question is that about reincarnation. Now, and then you said that about, roughly speaking, half the world's population believes in reincarnation, and not all that many people in resurrection. Rightly understood, just to correct that at the moment, I would say probably much more than half the population of the world believes in reincarnation. But I also believe that almost everybody in the world believes in resurrection, rightly understood. Not under that terminology, because that's a very limited, strictly. So we'll come back to that. So I understand your question now. How do I, as a Roman Catholic monk, deal with the question of reincarnation? Well, many people say the Church does not allow you to believe in reincarnation. The reason for that is that long ago, in the 3rd century, the first great theologian, and probably the greatest theologian ever in the history of the Church, Origen, wrote in several of his works in a way that showed that he accepted reincarnation. And some of his works were later on rejected by the Church, but not explicitly because of reincarnation. So, although it is true that those works of Origen in which he wrote about reincarnation, or simply took it for granted, were rejected, they were not explicitly rejected because of reincarnation. This was much more complex. So that one could rightly say that the Western tradition, and particularly the Christian tradition, just hasn't confronted the question of reincarnation sufficiently. And now in our days, because of our closer contact with other religions through the media, and because the world is much more in interaction these days, and now the theologians, the Catholic theologians, have to confront that issue, and probably the greatest Roman Catholic theologian of this century, Karl Rahner, only towards the end of his life confronted that issue, because he wasn't familiar with it before. And now when everybody was talking about it, he studied it, and then he wrote, shortly before his own death, a short piece on the teachings of the Church about death and everything that's connected with it. And when he came to what we call purgatory, that is a time of purgation, we might have to say more about that later, but anyway, when we came to purgatory, he wrote, and this is the place where the doctrine of reincarnation fits in, but we have not studied this issue, and there will have to be a lot more work to be done on it. And for my own personal use, I have studied that issue sufficiently to say that when somebody asks me, which often happens after a lecture, so it's a very popular topic, so somebody says, do you believe in reincarnation? Just quote off that. The simplest for me is to say, yes, I do, because I'm a Roman Catholic, and our name for it is purgatory, but we haven't developed it very much.
So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing that from Karl Rahner's standpoint, it might be a bit premature to equate purgatory with reincarnation, and yet on the other hand, there is certainly a fertile possibility there with regard to that kind of parallel.
Right, and equating is of course not exactly what I would suggest either. It is just the area of concern, because the area of concern behind purgatory is what happens to a person who is basically on the right track, but has not found fulfillment. You cannot say that this life really led to fulfillment. So this life is over, fulfillment is not yet here. Will this person have a chance to find fulfillment? Purgatory says yes, as through a fire. We'll have to go as somebody who goes through a fire. This is taken from one of the letters of St. Paul. The idea is when your house burns down, your life is saved. You've gone through a fire, everything else is burnt, but your life is saved. And this is the image that's used. But I do have to say something else about reincarnation in itself. And that is that I have had the great privilege of studying this question with Samdong Tulku Rinpoche, who is the head of the Institute for Higher Tibetan Studies in Sarnath in India. And he invited me, and especially mostly for this question, we spent a long time together, and he taught me about it. And while he was teaching me the authentic Tibetan understanding of reincarnation, I could understand it all, and I could see very clearly that it was perfectly compatible with Christian teaching. It was just on another track. It was a whole different philosophy behind it and so forth. But there was no point of incompatibility. But it was so refined and so subtle that I was like standing intellectually on tiptoe. And the moment he stopped talking, I slumped down, and then I couldn't see over this wall anymore. See? So I cannot give you his teaching, but I can say that to the best of my knowledge, it is perfectly compatible. What it is almost incompatible with is what we find about incarnation here in our bookstores. The Tibetan teaching of reincarnation doesn't fit here. And I can even tell you why.
Yes, I was about to say why.
Because the main concern of the people who buy these books about reincarnation on the little paperback book stands, and therefore the main concern of those who write this kind of books is how can I perpetuate myself? After I die, how can I live on somehow? And my little ego, in other words. And the whole idea of Buddhism is that this little ego is an illusion.
Let me ask you a very personal question. What's going to happen to you when you die?
Well, one thing that one should probably say first is we don't know. I think it's very healthy for any religion to be able to say, I don't know. And from then we go on and we say, but we make certain gestures and
yes.
we have certain intuitions and so forth. Now, in the Christian tradition, this is even more problematic because although I do believe in the traditional teaching, the language that the traditional teaching uses is not our language anymore. We can't see things like that anymore. I can say them just to someone who understands the language, just as you could talk Chaucerian English to somebody
yes.
who also speaks Chaucerian English. But if you try it on a bus, you won't get very far. So I do not want to use that language normally. And we have had insights and we have had glimpses of reality that go beyond what we can express in our language.
Now, by the traditional language, are you just simply meaning the language of salvation, of heaven and hell?
Heaven, hell, judgment, personal judgment, general judgment, purgatory, and all this.
All that.
That's all right. I believe in what stands behind it.
Yes.
But if I say it like that, it doesn't even sound true to myself anymore because
yes.
we speak now in a different context.
Okay, so now how can it be said?
How can I say it? All right, I'll tell you how I say it.
Yes.
This may be a little complicated,
that's fine.
but I try. This is how I say it to myself. And I've on occasion shared it with others, but this, some people like it and others
don't. The secret.
Okay. So this is how I think. You have to start with time. Time is the important thing here, because if I ought to define death, I would not try to do it with brain death or some other medical thing,
yes.
but from my personal experience, I would say death is that event that happens when my time is up. You see? So as somebody said, death is the last thing I want to do. It is the last thing you want to do. It's the final thing. So after death, time is up. There is no more time. And this is why I'm already uncomfortable to speak about afterlife. You see, if death is that when lifetime is over, then in that sense, the word afterlife does not apply. But afterlife, or what most people mean by it, is of course a reality of some sorts. So I prefer to call it beyond life. And this beyond life, we experience already here. You and I and everybody else, every day, every minute, we experience something that is not in time, but stands out about time. That's what we call human existence. We exist. That means literally we stick out. We stick out from time into that which is beyond time. And we call it now. Now is not in time. You see? Everybody knows what now means, and they say, what do you mean now is not in time? There is the future, and then there's the past, and in between is this little stretch of time that is now. Well, if it's a little stretch of time between the future and the past, why don't you cut it in half, and half of it is not because it is no more, and the other half is not because it is not yet. And as long as it is any stretch of time, you can always cut it in half. And so we find that now is not in time. Now is something we know which goes beyond time as humans. And therefore, and this is now my answer in the shortest form to your question, what happens to you when you die? Time is up. And all that remains is now, because now was never in time. And time was always distracting me from now. And when I'm finally, with a sigh of relief, let go of time, here is now.
Now can really show up. It can emerge.
It can emerge.
Exactly.
And in all our moments, there was this now element. And if you remember now, your best moment from 20 years ago and your best moment from 5 days ago, they are one now. They are all in this now. You have them somewhere here in your memory. And when all this time distraction is gone, you have all your nows at once. And so you are now, so to say, in possession of your whole life. And through this life, which you never had time to really look at, it was just too confusing, and then always eating itself up as the future is eating up the past. Now you have it all at once, and now so to say, for all eternity, which isn't a long, long time, but it's the now that does not pass away.
Yes.
You look at your life, and through your life, because everything hangs together with everything,
yes.
you see everything, and you're connected with everything, and you begin to understand everything and God. This is the window through which you see ultimate reality in God.
I see. Let's say you're in a room with me and I'm about to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have any belief. I don't have any foundation to stand upon that's going to support me as I die.
Yeah.
What do you try to share with me? How do you try to speak to me?
Right.
I'm dying and I don't believe.
Right. Well, it depends very much on how far you are gone.
Yes.
If you are pretty far gone, I will hold your hand, or I will try and massage your feet, and I will just be present to you, and I will mediate this communion that we belong together, and this sense of belonging. See? But if you are still a ways off from dying, and if you can still talk, and if you are still alert and so forth, then I will ask you some things about your life. And I will try, and as people who are old and people who are dying often like to do, I will help you remember things that you really liked, and people whom you really liked, and your first date or something like that, or your children, and remember the day when your first child was born, and this sort of thing. And I will try and bring that back to you. And whether I will say it or not, that depends completely on the circumstances. But sooner or later, whether it's explicitly said or not, you will realize that you knew something that lasts. You see, that is why when you are in love, you are engraving it on a tree, because you want to make it last. You know it lasts. And somehow, through this memory, there will dawn on you the reality that there is within this life a life that you have been living that cannot die. And that's the best of you. And that is the life that we all share. That is why the sense of belonging is so important. If you can't say anything anymore, just hold them and give them a sense of belonging. And that is the Christ life within us. And that is why I said that most people in the world believe in resurrection, whether they know that term or not, because they know that there is a life that cannot die. But it is too good to be true, you see. And now in the resurrection message, the Christians say, look, we have experienced it, and if they live in a way that it's believable, if they act like people who believe in life, that means not only in their own little survival, but in the life of other people, that is valuable. If they serve others, that has enormous social implications, you know, for everybody. If they believe in that indestructible life that is in every person, then that is a life that has overcome death. And as a poet said, death is not ahead of us, death is behind us.
Yes,
Death lies behind us as Christians.
So that, in a sense, goes back to something that you said earlier about you can't really die until you fully live, and you can't really fully live until you are able to die and to let go and give up. And now you're suggesting that this notion of resurrection has something to do in some mysterious way with that which lasts.
Right.
And that without even using any of the Christian terminology,
you have access to it.
You have access to that just in natural terms, in terms of a person's human experience.
Yes.
To try to remind them of those things which last.
Right.
So that the skill of the counselor in that moment would be to try to get a person to back in touch with those experiences.
Right. And to enjoy them, and to sink into them, and to let go. You see, that goes together. It takes, if you cling to them, you remember, probably you experienced this, two people in an old age home, right next to one another in the bed, and one remembers her past and how happy she was, and every time she remembers it, she moans and groans that she has lost it all. And the other one remembers similar things and always says how grateful I am, how lucky I was, and is happy and dies happily. So it's only this switch of being grateful, that means letting go. It is inseparable from one another. And that takes a lot of effort. And because at the time of death we will be probably sick and decrepit and weak and not at our best, and it takes that much effort, we better make this effort now. So I would say die while you're alive, because when it comes to dying, you might not be well enough to really die. You really do this.
Now, let me stay with the issue of how you are with a person in the face of death, but shift it from being with the person who's actually dying to being with a person who has just lost a loved one. Let's talk about the person who's grieving. A student in one of my classes recently asked me the question this way. She said, now here I am taking this class in death and dying, and here I am learning about all of these wonderful theories and these wonderful pictures about afterlife and about the fact that death is really an illusion and that when you die, you don't really die. And so I know all this and I have all this, let's say. And now I lose my husband. And it just simply all goes like water through sand.
Yes.
And she says, why is it that even though I know all of these things, they don't help to support me in that hour of my deepest crisis? So my question is, what do you say to a person in that time to help them in their grieving?
Well, before you even come to that, since you were talking about a class, I think it would be very helpful to take this a step further behind, still earlier, and make people in the class realize, think of the person they most love, they would most grieve if that person dies, and then remember that that person will die. And that they will lose that. See? So we can have a right relationship with another person only to the extent to which it is already seen against this horizon of death. And if we do what our society so often does and closes the eyes to that and just tries to live in happiness now ever after, forgetting that this is not possible except in fairy tales, the relationship is already wrong. There's this horizon of death is missing. And when you remember death, it comes alive. Only because you remember death, you see it against this horizon, and it becomes much more sparkling. You live now every moment as if it were the last one and the first one, with this freshness. Of course, that's humanly impossible, but at least that's the ideal. So that would be the first step. Now we come to the situation where the person has actually lost someone. Whether she has lost her husband, whether she has lived with this anticipation or not, will make a difference, but it will not take away the grief and the grieving. And grieving is a very long process, and we should savor it. I think we should really give ourselves time to savor it and not help people to get quickly over the grieving. I don't think that's the goal of any counselor, but to get deeply into the grieving, get deeply into it so that you really bring out of it all that is in it for life. I lost my cat a little less than a year ago, a cat that I was taking care of at the monastery. I'm still grieving for this cat, and that is a very important process for me. Pets are often... grieving for pets is often more difficult than grieving for humans, because we haven't learned that yet. For grieving with humans, we have a little more help. Well, anyway, what I would try to help this person see is, first of all, be grateful for all that we had, and in that gratefulness realize it is not lost. Anything that ever was remains. And it remains whether you remember it or not, but you can plug into it by remembering. It is, you see, it's not gone. It is. It is now as past. But from that center of your being, where you are beyond time, you can plug into anything in the past, in the future, in the present, and you can still do that. And you can now relive, so to say, in a very healthy way, every minute that you had with your deceased husband in a new way. Relive it and relive it. Because as T.S. Eliot says, what has been and what could have been point to one end, which is always present.
Yes.
So you can, everything that could have been, you can realize it now in your inner attitude.
Yes.
And as you do that, you will not be locked up in some little box or something, but you will be more ready even to remarry. Possibly. This is perfectly open. This is not just making now an idol of that deceased person. It is being deeply in touch with life. That's the decisive thing. And life continuously changes, and life has this core of the resurrection life, as we would say as Christians, which cannot pass.
I see. How do you want to die?
How do I want to die? Well, one thing that comes to mind, I would like to die when I'm ready. I believe somehow that one always dies when one is ready. But I would like to die when I feel that my life has reached fulfillment, and then I can sort of hand over my life to God. But whether it will come about like that or not, in external circumstances, I don't know. And therefore, it's better to practice right now handing over your life under the most unlikely circumstances, because they may be unlikely when the time comes. But this gesture of, here it is, it's yours, I receive it every moment gratefully from you, and if you want it, give it back. I hope that I will have the strength to do that when the time comes.
Thank you very much, Brother David.
You're welcome.